This week on Warriors and Company.
We have just come through this sort of extraordinary real-world demonstration of the folly of our financial system, of all the stuff that we've been doing, the deregulation of the last 30 years, the setup of the Federal Reserve System, however you want to put it, it has all failed us.
And
you no longer really have one person, one vote. You have one person, one vote, $1 million.
So essentially you can create the regulatory landscape that you want if you can essentially buy elections.
Funding is provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, celebrating 100 years of philanthropy and committed to doing real and permanent good in the world. The Kohlberg Foundation, Independent Production Fund, with support from the Partridge Foundation, a John and Polly Guth charitable fund. The Clements Foundation, Park Foundation, dedicated to heightening public awareness of critical issues. The Herb Alpert Foundation, supporting organizations whose mission is to promote compassion and creativity in our society. The Bernard and Audrey Rappaport Foundation. The John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. Ann Gumowitz. The Betsy and Jesse Fink Foundation. The HKH Foundation. Barbara G. Fleischman. And by our sole corporate sponsor, Mutual of America, designing customized individual and group retirement products. That's why we're your retirement company.
welcome. If you're visiting a candidate this summer and looking for a thoughtful house gift, might we suggest a nice super PAC? Thanks to the Supreme Court and Citizens United, they're all the rage among the mega wealthy. All it takes is a little paperwork and a wad of cash, and presto, you can have, as the Washington Post describes it, a highly customized, highly personalized political action committee. It's easy. Super PACs come in all amounts and affiliations. You don't have to spend millions, although a gift that size certainly won't be turned aside. Cable TV tycoon Mark Nathanson got a super PAC for his friend, longtime Democratic Congressman Howard Berman from California, and all it cost was $100,000. Down in North Carolina, Republican congressional candidate George Holding received a handsome super PAC that includes $100,000 each from an aunt and uncle and $250,000 from a bunch of his cousins. Yes, nothing says family like a great big homemade batch of campaign contributions.
2012 is the most important election we're ever going to have.
You can start a super PAC on your own or contribute to one that already exists. Super PACs are available for every kind of race, presidential, congressional, or statewide. But there are other ways you can help buy an election. Look at the Wisconsin recall campaign of Republican Governor Scott Walker. At least 14 billionaires rushed to Walker's side. He outraised his Democratic opponent by nearly 8-1. Most of his money came from out of state. More than $60 million were spent, and $45 million of it for Walker alone. Here are just a few of the satisfied buyers. Wisconsin billionaire Diane Hendricks contributed more than $500,000 on Scott Walker's behalf. Fearful the United States might become a socialistic, ideological nation, she's an ardent foe of unions and against, in her words, taxing job creators. True to her aversion to taxes, she paid none in 2010, despite being worth, according to Forbes magazine, about $2.8 billion. Before he launched his crusade against the collective bargaining rights of working people, Governor Walker held this conversation with Diane Hendricks.
Any chance we'll ever get to be a completely red state and work on these unions?
Oh, yeah.
And become a right to work?
Well, in fact,
what can we do to help you?
Well, we're going to start in a couple of weeks with our budget adjustment bill. The first step is we're going to deal with collective bargaining for all public employee unions.
Right.
Because you divide and conquer.
And so he did. Walker also hauled in checks from the Texas oligarch Bob Perry for nearly $500,000. Perry made his fortune in the home building business and is best known nationally for contributing $4.5 million to the Swift Boat campaign that smeared the Vietnam War record of Democratic presidential candidate John Kerry back in 2004. Then there's casino king Sheldon Adelson, who gave Scott Walker's cause $250,000. Of course, that's a drop in the old champagne bucket compared to the $21 million Adelson's family gave to the super PAC that kept Newt Gingrich in the race long after the formaldehyde had been ordered. Adelson did not long mourn Gingrich's passing and is now giving $10 million to the pro-Romney super PAC Restore Our Future. Next up on Scott Walker's list of beneficent plutocrats, Rich DeVos, owner of the Orlando Magic basketball team and co-founder of the home products giant Amway, which, thanks to Republican leaders in Congress, once shared in a $19 million tax break after a $1 million DeVos contribution to the Republican Party. He's a longtime member of the secretive Council for National Policy, a who's who of right-wing luminaries. And Louis Moore Bacon, the billionaire founder of the hedge fund Moore Capital, which in 2010 was fined $25 million for attempted commodities manipulation. A big backer of Romney, he too came to Walker's aid in Wisconsin. I could go on and name more, but you get the picture. These are the people who are helping to fund what the journalist Joe Hagan describes as a tsunami of slime.
Newt Gingrich, too much baggage.
Even as they are afforded respectability in the value-free world of plutocracy, they can hide the fingerprints they're leaving on the bleeding corpse of democracy. And that's how the wealthy 1% does its dirty business. They want to own this election. So if there are any of you left out there with millions to burn, better buy your candidate now while supplies last. This is no time to mince words, and thank goodness Thomas Frank never does so. In a recent essay in Harper's Magazine, It's a Rich Man's World, he wrote, over the course of the past few decades, the power of concentrated money has subverted the professions, destroyed small investors, wrecked the regulatory state, corrupted legislators en masse, and repeatedly put the economy through the ringer. Now it has come for our democracy itself. Strong stuff, and typical of Thomas Frank, the historian and journalist. His book, What's the Matter with Kansas?, was a bestseller about how we so willingly allow money and ideology to subvert government against our own self-interest. Now we have his latest, Pity the Billionaire, in which he explores how the worst economy since the 1930s has led to a revival of power for the very people who brought it about. Thomas Frank, welcome.
It's my pleasure to be here.
This week, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, testified before the Senate Banking Committee on how his bank got it wrong on risk management. What would you think if I told you that 7 members of the Senate Banking Committee have been big recipients of money from J.P. Morgan Chase?
I would not be surprised, not in the least. That's obviously where J.P. Morgan would be spending its lobbying dollar, would be on the giving to the campaigns of the people on that committee. That's the wisest strategic choice for them.
And get this, the bank has been the second largest contributor to Senator Tim Johnson, Democrat, the chairman of the committee.
And I got news for you. They also, I mean, you know this already, they also were one of the biggest donors, or their employees, to President Obama's campaign in 2008 and also to, I believe, to John McCain's campaign in 2008. This is the nature of what they do. They spread the wealth around, you know.
And there's more. One of Senator Johnson's former staffers is now one of J.P. Morgan's chief lobbyists. Mm-hmm. And the chairman's present top assistant used to be a lobbyist for a law firm that worked for J.P. Morgan. I mean, this wasn't a hearing. This was a reunion of the Gambino family.
Well, look, this is what we call in Washington the revolving door, okay? And this is, if your viewers haven't heard of this, they need to learn about it right away, because this is how Washington D.C. works. Is that people go back and forth from typically from Capitol Hill staffs to working for lobby firms or directly for the clients of the lobby firms that have to do with the interests that they used to work on when they were on Capitol Hill, and then they go back and lobby for to their former boss, right, and convince him or her to vote one way or the other. And that's how you get ahead in lobbying, is you start out working for someone on Capitol Hill, a powerful senator on a given committee, and then you go and essentially sell that expertise, sell that, the fact that you're friends with that guy to a lobbying firm or to a bank or to whoever. That's totally how it works.
It's an interlocking cartel, and it's serious business. How can we claim to have a representative government when they really are representing the people who bought the campaigns and not the voters who voted for them? I'm serious. That's a serious question.
Well, there are people who, I'm going to get cynical on you here, Bill. There are people who believe that the more money we have in politics, the closer we become to a democracy. That they think it's better for there to be more money in politics. Why do they think that? Because they think that the market is a democracy, that markets are a democracy, and that government is, when government interferes in the economy, it's illegitimate by definition. And so, the more money we get in there, the more it allows entities like J.P. Morgan to defend themselves against the sort of, the heavy-handed meddling of some, Washington, bureaucrat.
But what does it say when members of the Senate Banking Committee have received $13 million over the last few years from the financial services industry? And these are the guys who are supposed to protect the common folks out there from the predatory lenders. I mean, what happened?
They haven't done a very good job, have they? They've done exactly the opposite. Yeah. I mean, you look over their record over the last 20 years, all the amazing ways in which they deregulated the financial industry. I mean, this is the story of our time. And they deregulated this aspect, the other, everything, overturned the Glass-Steagall rules, that's the biggest example. But my favorite one, this actually wasn't the Senate that did this, this was the Bush administration. A lot of states had laws against predatory lending, and were enforcing those laws. And this would have stopped the housing bubble in its tracks, the no-doc loans and this kind of nonsense that was going on. The Bush administration preempted those laws, the state-level laws, and said, no, predatory lending is now only going to be enforced at the federal level, and here's how we're going to enforce it, by doing nothing.
There's also a report out this week from Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent senator from Vermont. Would you believe, according to his figures, that 18 former and current directors from Federal Reserve banks, including Jamie Dimon, directly benefited from the financial bailouts after the 2008 crisis?
That's not a surprise. It's cronyism in this kind of extreme otherworldly dimension. When the bailouts happened, and when all this stuff was on the front pages, it was the kind of moment that really shakes the faith of an entire nation. It was so disturbing. Well, first, the financial crisis was disturbing. The failure of Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch going down, Chrysler and GM declaring bankruptcy, one after another on the headline of the newspaper. It was the pillars of middle-class life crumbling around us. And it was astonishing, okay? And then the second chapter, the bailouts, with this enormous price tag, where these guys on Wall Street, the bankers, just whistled up the resources of the public treasury for their own benefit. And the country could have gone in any of several different directions. Now, I was looking at this from the perspective of the 1930s.
When the collapse of the economy brought out a large social protest and a demand.
There were bailouts then in the 30s. The Hoover administration did massive bailouts of the banks. And it was exactly the same thing. It was rampant cronyism. I'll tell you a story. So the head of Hoover's bailout agency was called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. The guy that Hoover put in charge of it had been Calvin Coolidge's vice president. Cronyism already, right? At one point, the guy quits his job as head of the bailout agency and goes back to his bank in Chicago. A couple months later, he comes to the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, which he had just a few weeks before been the head of, and says, "Oh, I need a bailout." And they give him one. And the country is like outraged, right? Because ordinary people have lost their jobs. Unemployment is at 30%, whatever it is. It's catastrophe. And this guy, who politically connected, is getting a bailout. And the country reacted, though, not with Tea Party movement, not with people demanding more deregulation. It reacted by electing Franklin Roosevelt, and it reacted with an enormous labor movement and all of the things that we remember from the 1930s. And when I watched this stuff happen, the banks getting their bailouts, I thought, we're going to see that happen again. We're going down the tracks of, very well-worn tracks. We can all see what's coming.
Everybody was saying, "Come on, Barack, give us an FDR rally."
That's right. I thought it was a Roosevelt moment.
Yeah.
He certainly had the kind of public adulation that Franklin Roosevelt had in 2008. Remember those crowds when he was inaugurated? All those people out on the National Mall. He was something like a national savior. People really thought it's Franklin Roosevelt all over again. Didn't work out that
But
way.
recently, Barack Obama sent his campaign manager, Jim Messina, to New York to assure the financial services industry, Wall Street, that when they heard Barack Obama talk populist rhetoric on the campaign trail, he wasn't going to demonize them.
He wasn't going to demonize Wall Street. Oh no. This is the amazing thing to me, that we have just come through this sort of extraordinary real-world demonstration of the folly of our financial system, of all the stuff that we've been doing, the deregulation of the last 30 years, the setup of the Federal Reserve System, however you want to put it. It has all failed us. And we haven't been able to rise to the challenge and do anything, to fix it in a really structural way, like they did in the 1930s. We haven't done that. And Barack Obama, who had that opportunity and had both houses of Congress and had, the world at his feet in 2008, could have gone in any direction he chose, instead chose to basically follow in the footsteps of the sort of tepid centrist Democrats before him, to do little regulatory things here and there, to use some sort of mean-sounding rhetoric at times, but to not really change anything. And the failure is the Democrats. The Democratic Party has by and large not risen to the challenge. This is not the party of Franklin Roosevelt. It's not the party of Lyndon Johnson. This is a party that can't,
And Barack Obama, for all of his virtues and intelligence, is not a man of the people.
No, he's not. And he also, he's a man of academia. He's a man who believes in experts and expertise, as we've seen in many, all the different sort of arenas of his presidency, whether you're talking about the war in Afghanistan or whether you're talking about the financial crisis. This is a man who defers to experts, believes in expertise. He does not have much sympathy for, say, the labor movement. He can't go out there and tell you why, say, the regulatory agencies failed. He can't, it doesn't make sense to him. He can't talk about these things that everybody wants to know about. Now, on the other side, you've got a movement, the conservative movement, a right-wing populist movement that talks a very good game, that speaks to people's anger, and that offers them a kind of idealism, a kind of hope that perversely draws on a lot of the rhetoric of the 1930s and models itself after a lot of the movements of the 1930s. And what they offer, and this is interesting, what they offer, the dream, the sort of utopia, the vision that they have for the future of our country is pure free markets. And they say this all the time. It's not me making this up. You go to any Tea Party rally and they talk about this
We've covered
constantly.
them. You're exactly right.
If we can just get government out of the way and we can reach out,
But getting government out of the way is what helped bring down the economy.
Of course, but they say the only problem is that government, yes, we deregulated all that stuff. We deregulated all through those years, but we didn't go far enough. And so you can say to them, well, look at the record of George W. Bush, the champion deregulator. Look at all the amazing things that he did to set Wall Street loose, to deregulate. And they're like, well, George W. Bush was not a real conservative. They say this all the time. It's very easy for them to, because they're such purists and such ideologues, to excommunicate someone like George W. Bush from their movement and say, well, he wasn't pure enough. 10 years ago, they had little statues of him on their desk, but now he's thrown out of the movement, not pure enough,
and that's
because
their
of the
idealism.
bailouts.
Their idealism is their unblinking faith in the free market.
Yes, and this is an idea that when I first started writing about it was something that you only saw from the Jamie Dimons of the world. I called it market populism. It was something that you saw on CNBC in the early days, in the stock market boom of the 90s. You would see it in like personal investment books, and I made fun of it. Today it is everywhere. It is epidemic. It's not just the high and the mighty that believe this stuff now, that believe that markets are both a natural phenomenon and a democratic phenomenon. This is average people all across America that believe this.
You're a historian. Why has this happened?
Our anger turned from Wall Street to Washington, and it happened in a very short period of time. If you remember back to 2009 when the bailouts were going on, the sort of high point of public anger came when AIG, remember these guys? This is a company that should not exist any longer. These are the people that they didn't invent the credit default swap, but they sort of took it to its logical extreme. And these guys were not only bailed out, they were handing out bonuses to the executives in the division that had invented the credit default swap and had done all these crazy things. And the public was so angry. This is in March of 2009. I remember the feeling.
Yeah, I do
People
too.
were
I was
furious.
reporting on it.
And then all of a sudden, the direction changed. It went away from AIG and over to Washington. And we decided that the real villains in all of this was Washington. And
But Tom, why wouldn't you feel that way if you saw how the banking committee is dominated by money from Wall Street? If you know that 18 members
Exactly.
of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors are benefiting from the bailout, if you see the deregulators helping Wall Street despite all this, why wouldn't your anger be directed toward Washington?
they certainly deserve a really, really big helping of public anger. And there's a lot of terms. Look, I imagine I'm going to make fun of the Tea Party movement, and that's certainly what my new book, Pity the Billionaire, is about. But let's give them some concessions right off the bat. When they talk about crony capitalism, they're right. When they talk about what you just said, all these interconnections between the banks and the legislators, they're right. When they talk about, they use this term, the ruling class. That term is totally right on the money. That's a term that we should be throwing around these days.
But
these
the ruling
people are,
class
they are
is-
in bed with each other.
But
you
the
know.
ruling class is funding their movement. The Koch brothers,
Exactly. This is the
big corporations,
this is-
Wisconsin.
This is the funny thing, that instead of looking at the present situation and saying the regulatory system broke down, we need stricter oversight on these people. We need a political, we need Washington to at least be strong enough and smart enough to supervise these guys and make sure this never happens again, which was the response that we had in the 1930s. Their response is, it's impossible to regulate these guys. What we have to strive for instead is some kind of pure free market system. So get government out of the way altogether. Stop trying to regulate them. And you see the kind of people who've been elected as a result of this populist anger out there in the country get in office and immediately go to war against the Securities and Exchange Commission that's supposed to regulate Wall Street. They want to hammer those guys into the ground. They go after the only sort of substantial new regulatory agency, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They go after those guys. They've tried to defund them. They wanted to make sure Elizabeth Warren would not be chairman of it. They've gone to war against regulation, against the very idea of government oversight of the financial markets. This is fascinating. How can you react to, 3 decades of financial deregulation leads to this collapse, this tremendous disaster. And our response as a nation has been to say, well, we need more of that. We need to deregulate more.
Is one of the reasons money in politics, both of us know there's nothing new about money in politics in American history. What's the difference now?
Well, there's 2 things. One is the sheer size of it. We've really turned it loose. With the Citizens United decision, we're going to see a wave of money that we've never seen before. The 2010 midterm elections dwarfed what they call independent expenditures, which is expenditures by PACs and super PACs. In 2010, were 2 times what they were in 2008. So there's that. The other thing is that we are so blasé about the money. It doesn't shock us anymore. And there was a time when, John McCain is a Republican, was offended by money in politics. Today, we've all sort of made our peace with it.
You raised Citizens United. When Justice Anthony Kennedy wrote the majority opinion for the other conservative judges,
Yes.
he said flatly, quote, "This court now concludes that independent expenditures, including those made by corporations, do not give rise to corruption or the appearance of corruption."
Yeah.
Can anyone in touch with reality believe that?
I don't see how you can. To say that doesn't give rise to the appearance of corruption when the billionaires are more or less directly, staking these men to runs for the presidency.
And when you got the banking committee taking money from J.P. Morgan, whose CEO is testifying.
But even worse, when he wrote those words, the country was in the throes of this populist outrage at Wall Street because Wall Street had been able, as I said before, to get itself a bailout. The connection between private wealth and public power and the force of government had never been more clear. And that's the moment when he wrote that decision saying, well, that is by definition, we hereby decree that is not corrupt. And that it doesn't even appear to be corrupt. And yet, the country's politics are being moved by that very perception at that same moment.
Someone the writer E.J. Dionne, says that the Citizens United decision is part of, quote, I'm quoting, a larger initiative by moneyed conservatives to rig the electoral system against their opponents.
That's right.
You agree with that?
No doubt about it. For a long time, the people have been talking about the conservative movement in their effort to develop some kind of permanent lock on power. And I think that Citizens United might be what, might be the thing that actually delivers that. Not because it's going to give Republicans per se a lock on power or give them a permanent majority or anything like that. You're still going to have a two-party system no matter what happens. But it will tilt our politics in a certain direction. It will draw both parties by a sort of force of gravity in a certain direction. Before you can even, when you put such a price tag on elected office, and this has been going on for years, but today it's way up there in the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to run for the presidency, and who knows how many millions to run for the United States Senate, and a couple million to run for the House of Representatives. When you put a price tag like that on political office, you automatically rule out lots of people and lots of ideas from the competition. If you have to be able to reach out to the billionaire community and make your case to the billionaire community even before you begin, even before you start running for office, automatically a lot of ideas, and a lot of ideas that are very traditional, very American, as red, white, and blue ideas, are automatically off the table. You have to be able to please that class of donors before you even start.
So our choices are narrowed to candidates favored by the rich.
The choices have already been made for us.
Yeah.
Instead of 20 candidates out there, they've chosen 2 candidates who've made it through the money primary. And that's who we get to take our pick from.
Tom, here's the dilemma. I know a lot of good citizens who are simply giving up. 2 nights ago, I was with some old friends out in the Midwest, your part of the country, and one of them looked at me and said, I don't know what to do, so I'm just bailing out. And she was serious.
Look, I have the same problem myself. I also have an answer. I have a solution for you. You want to hear what it is?
I do.
We need third parties in this country. And by that I don't mean another third party supported by billionaires that's centrist, in the sort of Ross Perot manner. I mean parties that represent different opinions on the spectrum in the manner of the Populist Party in the 1890s, which was really the last time we saw a third party movement that contested the ballot from the bottom all the way to the top. They were a real political party. Unfortunately, the techniques that the populists used are against the law in most states. If we were to repeal those laws, you might have a vibrant third party scene again.
But the 2 parties, the Republicans and the Democrats, make sure that those
laws stay in place.
Yeah,
exactly.
That the barriers are not taken down.
The other thing we need, and this is even, everything is going against me here, a labor movement. It just seems, as I look back over all the books that I've written, and we look back over our lives, what's missing from when we were young and where we are now? What made that world, in the 1960s, different from this world that we're in today? And the answer just leaps out at you. It was a strong labor movement.
But do you think the returns in Wisconsin suggest that is?
No, I don't think that's in the cards. And the Democratic Party could have made it a possibility with something like the Employee Free Choice Act in the Obama years, and they declined. They decided not to do it. They didn't really lift a finger for their friends in the labor movement, and are watching them just get wiped out.
If we become, as you suggest, we are already becoming a country of rich people, what's the odds then of reversing that trend?
Well, we're not going to be a country of rich people, Bill. Some people are going to be rich. We're going to be a country ruled by rich people. We already are to a certain degree, and there's a word for it. Plutocracy, rule by wealth. And there's no doubt in my mind, this is the direction we've been heading for a long time. We came to a turning point and we didn't turn. We came to a point where the plutocracy had utterly discredited itself, had ruined all of our savings, smashed our 401ks, defrauded us in countless ways, corrupted our government, as we saw in the Bush years and the Jack Abramoff, Tom DeLay years. And we came to a turning point and we didn't turn. We decided, no, we got to double down on this. We need, a stronger dose of that bad medicine. That's where we are today.
So why pity the billionaire?
That's sarcasm.
No, Tom Frank, sarcastic. Tom Frank, the book is Pity the Billionaire. Very good reading. Thank you very much for being with me.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
It's not just the wealthy, their super PACs, and the candidates they buy who profit from all this money. Dan Frumkin and Paul Blumenthal at the Huffington Post report that the top 150 political consultants and media buyers already have grossed nearly $500 million in this election cycle, and there's still 5 months left to go. These vast amounts of cash, much of it from anonymous sources, have rightly been described as dark money, and few have pursued the dark money trail more vigilantly than the people who coined that phrase, the hard-working journalists at Mother Jones magazine. Clara Jeffrey and Monica Boylan have been the co-editors of Mother Jones since 2006. Clara Jeffrey was senior editor at Harper's Magazine and worked at Washington City Paper in Washington, D.C. Monica Boylan was the investigative editor of Mother Jones and an editor at City Pages in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Their Dark Money project is produced with support from the Schumann Media Center, of which I'm president. Their latest issue of Mother Jones is a spellbinding look at dark money's history in the 40 years since the Watergate scandal brought down Richard Nixon in a tangled web of break-ins and bagmen. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Bill.
Love your cover. Wanna buy an election. Dracula with his jacket open and an American flag in it. Wanna buy an election. Both parties play this game. Both parties raise as much money as they can, go as close to the law as they can, will do almost anything to raise it. But is there some distinction between the money that flows through the Republican Party and the money that flows through the Democratic Party?
It used to be more equivalent than it is today. I mean, we remember covering the Clinton era scandals, and at that time, that was really a time when we saw the Democratic Party turning to big business and to Wall Street for funding that was no longer coming from organized labor and other Democratic constituencies that lost the clout that they used to have. But now it's the money coming from conservative and deregulatory interests is so much larger and so much
More extreme.
better focused in many ways that it puts to shame what Democrats can do.
I mean, let's look back at Obama's ability to raise, a pretty decent amount of money from Wall Street. And, Obama managed, for better or for worse, the response to the recession did not come down heavily on the banks, did not, no one's in jail. There's been some scolding, but nothing's really happened to the hedge fund managers, to the big banks. And yet, that money is not 100%, but close to 100% going to Romney this time, because those interests see in Romney and see in the Republicans that their agenda is going to be pushed to where they want it, that it is a more extreme pro-business, deregulatory climate that the Republican Party is eager to usher in.
Both sides can play this game, but Republicans have an inherent advantage in that their natural constituency has a lot more money. Outside expenditures, the kind of money that we tend to refer to as dark money, is about 2/3 to 3/4 Republican, and the rest is on the Democratic side. I'm sure Democrats and liberals in general would take more of that kind of money if it were available, but it's just not.
Mother Jones was the first I saw that used the term dark money. What were you after there? Why that term?
Well, we were searching around for a metaphor, and we had some celestial inspiration, as it were. Because like dark matter, which is something that's in the universe and we know is very powerful, but we don't really understand it and we can't really see it, and we're only beginning to be able to measure it. That's true of dark money, especially since Citizens United. There's just so much unregulated, undisclosed money flowing through super PACs and their 501Cs that are going to candidates. And to paraphrase John McCain, very often we don't know where the money's coming from, who it's going to, what its purpose is. It's just out there. We can see the effects of it later, but we don't really know in anything close to real time what's being raised and spent.
I want to show you an ad that I think is a perfect example of dark money. Your reporter, marvelous reporter Andy Kroll, as the Wisconsin recall was taking place, followed the money back to a Virginia-based super PAC called the Coalition for American Values, which spent something like $300,000 on ad time in each of Wisconsin's 7 major media markets. But let me play this ad for you.
I didn't vote for Governor Walker.
I did not vote for Scott Walker.
I didn't vote for Scott Walker, Joe, but I definitely against this recall.
Recall isn't the Wisconsin way.
There's a right way, there's a wrong way, and I think this is the wrong way.
I elected him to do a job.
Let him serve it out. Living in a democracy, you have to have faith in who the people elect.
I didn't vote for Scott Walker, but I'm against the recall.
And I agree. I agree with you.
End the recall madness. Vote for Scott Walker, June 5th.
That ad is really a perfect example of what we call dark money, because as you saw at the very end, it names a treasurer, and that is literally the sum total of the information really that's available about this group. When our reporter Andy Kroll tried to figure out who was behind this ad buy, he found a P.O. box in Milwaukee that leads to a P.O. box in Virginia that leads to nothing, and that is possible now, especially in the wake of Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision, and it doesn't allow voters to make up their own mind about where this message, this very sensible sounding message from, Bob and Chad and so forth is coming from.
And the message is, people would say it's a legitimate message. If you may not believe that recall was the way to punish the governor.
Sure, and interestingly, a lot of people who declared that they didn't really like Walker or his policies, but they did not vote to recall him because they did not think this was the right remedy. Now, would they have had that opinion so firmly if the state had not been bombarded by these ads for a week ahead of time? It's impossible to say. But what we can say is that this group, Andy was able to figure this out the day before the election, that this group was dumping all this money in and who they were, as best we know. But that's still precious little information for the voters of Wisconsin to really judge who's trying to influence them.
And what does it mean that the money can't be traced, that the public, the voters, the other candidate, the opponents cannot figure out who's putting up this money? What are the implications of that?
Well, that's really the question that you want to know as a participant in a policy debate is who is my opponent? Who am I debating? And what is their motivation for making the argument that they're making? That's all part of the totality of information that in a democracy, citizens should have available to them. And with dark money, that's really not possible because you get a message, a very well-crafted, stage-managed message, and you can't assess for yourself whether the person telling you this has an ulterior motive. And that's why historically we've had conflict of interest laws, and we've looked at lobbying disclosure, and we've had legislation limiting how much money you can invest in a political campaign, because people fully understand that those vested interests make a difference.
I mean, Americans have had essentially the same debates about the role and size of government and who should be helped by government and to what extent since our founding, right? That's a fair debate. It's a worthy debate. But if you are being influenced by things and you don't know who is doing it, and the messages are maybe not 100% honest, shall we say, if it's advertising, if it's push polling and robocalls that imply things about your candidate that are not true, that fundamentally changes the debate from one that's a fair and honest debate that should be held vigorously to something that's just much more insidious. And when the power stacks up on to the side of the wealthy again and again, then you're talking about the large portion of people in this country essentially being disenfranchised.
Do you think there's a connection between Citizens United and what happened in Wisconsin?
There's a direct connection. There's absolutely no doubt about it. When you look at the money that flowed into that campaign, that was made possible in part by Citizens United, because Citizens United wiped out the clean elections laws in states like Wisconsin and wiped out a tradition of disclosure. People were able to play the game in a way that they would never have been able to had Chief Justice Roberts and Justice Alito and the rest of the Citizens United majority not paved the way for them.
You say something in your joint editorial, the right recognizes something that few on the left recognize, that campaign finance law underlies all other substantive law. What does that mean?
It doesn't matter whether your primary issue is Second Amendment issues or abortion rights or the environment. All of those policies are made by politicians that are now deeply and unhappily influenced by the kind of money that's sloshing through the system. So essentially you can create the regulatory landscape that you want if you can essentially buy elections.
Take the role of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which represents these very huge corporations. And the instant that the Supreme Court ruled in Citizens United, the Chamber of Commerce said, we're going to be a big player. And even when a district court, a district judge required that they disclose the money they're giving, they just thumbed their nose at the court and said, we're not going to.
Right, that ruling came down a few weeks ago, and the district court was essentially saying, groups like the Chamber of Commerce, you will have to disclose your donors. And the Chamber of Commerce said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll wait for appeal. And I think it's a pretty straightforward calculus. A, they can have, by spending in this election, they can guarantee the results that they want in these elections. But also, they're looking at a Supreme Court that has come down quite clearly on the side of deregulation.
So the Chamber of Commerce can contribute unlimited amount of money that it has collected from corporations and wealthy individuals, and we'll never know where that money is coming from, right?
Well, interestingly, yes, they can, exactly. And that's what one of the things that everybody was wondering after Citizens United first came down was who will be the first, which corporations, which individuals will expose themselves to public scrutiny by going in and taking advantage of their freedom to spend money however they like, wherever they like. And the answer, it turned out, is nobody. Everybody likes to hide behind an organization with an innocuous name like Americans for Prosperity and, Americans for Apple Pie, and spend unlimited, unregulated money without any scrutiny and any disclosure.
Or they give their money to the chamber, knowing full well that the chamber will spend their money, generally, to eliminate regulations that are onerous to businesses, whether they're Clean Water and Clean Air Act type of regulations or tax regulations or pushing for things that would rein in the subprime industry. The Chamber of Commerce is going to try and make it the least friction to business as possible. And so corporations don't want to be known that they dumped a ton of money into one particular race, but they can give money to the chamber with the full knowledge that the chamber will do it. And furthermore, the chamber then has filtered money through things like the Republicans Governor Association, so it's this just ever-changing, complicated set of like three-card Monte, where the money's under there and it eventually gets to where they want it to go, but you can't really trace it.
It's particularly bad at the state level, actually. That's something that even people who have followed the evolution of dark money don't really fully understand, is that at the federal level, it created this new structure of super PACs and 501c3s and so forth. But at the state level, a federal organization can go into Wisconsin, register as a politically active corporation, check a box on a form, and never tell anybody anything other than, yes, our income comes from another P.O. box in another state, which gets its income from another P.O. box in another state.
Should we be looking at the money going into the races for Congress and the Senate as much as we look at the money going into the presidential race?
Maybe even more so.
If not more so, we will be looking at it very closely. And you know what else we will be looking at that nobody is really paying attention to yet is if you can get a lot of bang for your buck in a statewide election like this one, and you might be able to get even more bang for your buck in targeting a few seats in a state house and swinging the majority in a state legislature, you can get untold bang for your buck in a judicial race if you decide to invest in removing a judge who is in a habit of ruling in favor of consumers, for instance, or for upholding government regulations. If you can get rid of those people, as people have done, there have been fascinating John Grisham-worthy cases of corporations and corporate executives specifically investing in judicial races.
Like our old friend, Bob Swiftboat Perry, who has given money to every single member of the Texas Supreme Court which
in their race for office,
which ruled in his favor regarding a lawsuit involving the sort of quality and conditions of, he makes his money by being a mass, the biggest home builder in America. And basically people who were suing him for having shoddy construction, you know, they ruled in his favor. It's impossible to say that they wouldn't have otherwise. But here's the thing, the appearance of corruption is almost as bad as actual corruption, because it just makes people think that they have no stake in their government.
Well, I agree with you about the appearance of corruption, and that was the main argument when I was young in journalism. But the fact of the matter is, it seems to me as a journalist today, it is the actual corruption, the payback, in which the donor gets favorable regulations or favorable judicial decisions. That's corruption. It's bribery by another name.
And I think what's interesting is it also works to some extent the other way. When the politicians are shaking down lobbyists because they so desperately need the money in the race, I mean, the lobbyists say, you know, it's not us shaking them down. They're shaking us down. But they are locked in this arms race where they just have to raise more and more money. I mean, we broke down how much Congress people have to raise per hour. And say in the case of our own Senator Barbara Boxer, if she just fundraises for 40 hours a week, she has to raise $2,400 an hour. I mean, that's just a phenomenal amount of money that they have to raise. And, you know, ordinary people don't have that money to give.
So it's not even so much listening to some specific person who gave you some specific contribution. I think that's how people used to look at it. But now it's really much more about, can I have a career in politics if I routinely antagonize the interests, the only interests that can afford to underwrite a campaign? And that's something that everybody from a city council member all the way to the president has to contend with.
How do we change the game? The Supreme Court has essentially said money is speech, corporations are people, therefore under the First Amendment, the government cannot stop corporations from spending almost anything they want to spend. That's pretty awesome. How do you change it?
The start really probably is information. Because even to us, you know, when we work on these stories, a lot of the time it's not so much outrage that grips us as it is astonishment. You know, we follow this stuff for a living and we're still flabbergasted some of the time at what we find. And transparency, fortunately, is not something the Supreme Court stops us from doing. The Supreme Court came right out and said transparency is a good thing. It's Congress's job to make sure there is transparency. You over there take care of that, knowing full well, of course, that it's very, very difficult to get an incumbent Congress to mandate transparency. But in theory, there's nothing to stop the Congress from passing fantastic disclosure legislation tomorrow.
Well, in fact, there was a Disclose Act introduced a couple of years ago, and the Republicans killed it. Mitch McConnell in the Senate killed the Disclose Act. That's not very encouraging.
But it's back. It's back, it's wending its way through Congress again, and this time, John McCain, for example, who did not speak out for it the last time, has started to speak out on its behalf. So there is a chance that could pass.
And then once you have that, and you no longer have dark money filling every crevice of the political system, and there's sunshine on some of these activities, then you can start having a conversation about, do we want this to happen? Who is buying and selling your politics for you? And with that comes potentially momentum for change.
Shame is a great motivator, and sunshine would allow, you know, us to see who is doing this and for what reason, and in real time. I mean, that's completely possible. It's not like, you know, in the days of old where if someone gave money, the FEC couldn't possibly know for a full quarter. I mean, they can know right away. We just need the laws to demand that transparency happen immediately.
In fact, we have fantastic tools. I mean, now with what's available online, you could really make this kind of information available in real time to voters in every channel imaginable. You could annotate every political statement with pop-up video showing who paid for it.
Create a Twitter stream showing exactly who gave when and what, you know, in real time. So that's all technologically possible. It's just a matter of pressuring Congress first to pass the Disclose Act or something like it, and to have similar measures in the state houses and just to bring some transparency back. And really, what can be the argument against transparency?
Yeah,
I
what
mean,
can be the argument against transparency?
Not a good one that I can think of. I mean, I can see all kinds of reasons why corporations and other vested interests wouldn't want people to know that they're doing this, but it's really hard to make an argument, a public argument.
Clara Jeffrey and Monica Boylan, thank you very much for being with me.
Thank you so much for having us, Bill.
Thank you.
Another grandson graduated from high school this past weekend, and we were there for the festivities. From the hamburgers, hot dogs, and bratwurst, through the memories recollected with laughter and tears on the front porch long after the ceremonies ended. I never tire of these rituals. Like the pickle, relish, and mustard on the bratwurst, like life itself, they're bittersweet. Nostalgia and anticipation in equal portions. Where did that little kid go? Yesterday, he was squealing in the sandbox, chasing the cat, soaring on the old tire swing hanging from the elm out front, stubbing his toe, smacking his lips over the last morsel of watermelon, teasing Grandma from atop the backyard slide, and begging for one more round of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Now, in blazer, tie, and white pants, trying to stifle a big grin, he marches past us with his classmates. So tall he has to duck and swipe away a vine dangling from the makeshift trellis that separates the past from the future. The searing Minnesota sun threatened to cook us until the headwinds of a gathering summer storm cut the heat. No one seemed in a hurry for the afternoon to end. But it was a relief when the commencement speaker, eloquent defender of the liberal arts, proved to be both wise and mercifully brief. The crowd laughed when he asked, "Have you ever found yourself saying, that speech would probably have been perfect if it had been longer?" The school chorus, as if to tell us to relax, they know the score, belted out John Mayer's "No Such Thing." I want to run through the halls of my high school. I want to scream at the top of my lungs. I just found out there's no such thing as the real world. Just a lie you've got to rise above. And that's when it hit me. How we've let these kids down, the mess we've handed them, the huge debts, an economy producing too few jobs and vast inequality, a rich man's country with a flailing middle class, the tenuous prosperity of everyday people wiped out by Wall Street insiders and Washington hucksters, still up to their old tricks. And far below the waterline, like those passengers on the Titanic, the poor, traveling as always at the cheapest rate, trapped in steerage. How did we become a country of such ugly, stupid politics? One party doddering and feckless, the other radical and reckless and downright mean, driven by unblinking ideologues with kamikaze souls. How did we become the United States of denial? On the flight out, I read the report in a recent issue of the journal Nature by a team of 22 scientists warning that in the lifetime of these high school graduates, Earth could reach a tipping point as we put more and more pressure on our life support system, our crops, fisheries, and clean water, the diversity of species that enable us to be here. The planet could be plunged into uncharted territory from which there's no return. These scientists are parents and grandparents too, and they reject despair. The report's lead author told interviewers, "My bottom line is that I want the world in 50 to 100 years to be at least as good as it is now for my children and their children." It's not too late to change course, he says. We are a clever species. We have the solutions to these problems in our grasp. But for the denial. I snap out of my reverie. I hear our grandson's name being called, see him handed his diploma, watch the whole class rise, and think, they just might do it, just might pull us back from the edge, get us on the right track again. The musicians strike up the recessional, and here they come, to applause and cheers and tears, once more through the trellis and on beyond. At our website, BillMoyers.com, we've created a Money and Politics Spotlight page. You'll find reporting, tools, and links, all aimed at pulling dark money out of the shadows. That's all at BillMoyers.com. See you there and see you here next time.
Don't wait a week to get more Moyers. Visit BillMoyers.com for exclusive blogs, essays, and video features. This episode of Moyers & Company is available on DVD for $19.95. To order, call 1-800-336-1917 or write to the address on your screen. Funding is provided by Carnegie Corporation of New York, celebrating 100 years of philanthropy and committed to doing real and permanent good in the world. The Kohlberg Foundation, Independent Production Fund, with support from the Partridge Foundation, a John and Polly Guth charitable fund. The Clements Foundation, Park Foundation, dedicated to heightening public awareness of critical issues. The Herb Alpert Foundation, supporting organizations whose mission is to promote compassion and creativity in our society. The Bernard and Audrey Rappaport Foundation, the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. Ann Gumowitz, the Betsy and Jesse Fink Foundation, the HKH Foundation, Barbara G. Fleischman, and by our sole corporate sponsor, Mutual of America, designing customized individual and group retirement products. That's why we're your retirement company.